want to welcome everybody to Elders of Zionism podcast, here with Guy Goldstein, who's looking fantastic in his Tommy Bahama shirt. And if you want to see what he looks like, go to YouTube, go to Rumble, subscribe, give that thumbs up, and subscribe to us everywhere. And we want to thank everybody for all of the support. So you can find us everywhere at eldersofzionism.com. Guy, we've been chatting back and forth, and we're not doing shows every day like we used to, not just because it took a toll, but because we decided to change formats. And in a sense also, it takes a few days to figure out what's going on, and we've taken those few days and we still can't figure out what's going on.
Listen, as I was saying, the world has been flipped on its head again, and you would think that being flipped on its head a second time would set it straight again, but no, we're in another bizarro world.
So let's lead off with the bizarre, with what's really bizarre. So Lebanon and Israel have never spoken, never made an agreement. The United States and Lebanon and Rubio and Israel have been working on this deal for months. And an extremely difficult deal to put them at the table, because I want to remind people, Lebanon wants to be free from Hezbollah. The thing is, the head of Lebanon does not want to be Gaddafi. So this is extremely Guy, it's an extremely delicate situation. So this week, neither of them were told that, neither Israel nor Lebanon were told that they would be put on the MOU deal by Iran. So this week they had meetings, and one of the hardest obstacles supposedly was that it wasn't Israel and Lebanon hating each other; it was that they hated Vance for forcing Iran on them.
Right, and I think Lebanon has been one of the most confusing and complicated issues in this conflict, not because of the conflict itself, where it's relatively straightforward, but because of the fact that there are two parallel tracks that seem to be taking place to resolve it. So the longest standing track that's been taking place now is through the State Department and Marco Rubio's team, who have been looking to resolve the issue between Israel and Lebanon and to establish a cooperative arrangement to deal with Hezbollah. For context, the Lebanese army have been unable to deal with Hezbollah since 2006 or since 1983, the various times when, under international law, it was stated that Lebanon would be responsible for regaining sovereignty in its own territory. The IDF have been able to take over the territory that Hezbollah control, but obviously they're not the intended sovereign of Lebanon. And so the US, through Rubio and his sort of pragmatic statesmanship, came up with this idea of, if rather than try to get Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire and negotiate with terrorists, what if we find a way to get Lebanon and Israel to agree to how they can work together to fight a mutual enemy?
And one of the ways to do that was to create safe zones, right? Which Israel has been doing. They've been leveling parts of Lebanon. Why don't you tell people what they've been doing? Because it's pretty miraculous.
So Israel's strategy has been to seize territory in Lebanon in order to create a security buffer. This strategy is not new. This is the same thing that happened in 1983 after the first Israel-Lebanon war, which is another misnomer, because it was actually a war that Israel was fighting against the PLO and Hezbollah, who had established themselves in southern Lebanon. So it was actually the first Israel future Iranian proxy war. That security buffer was not perfect. There were soldiers dying there on a regular basis. It created a substantial amount of unrest in Israel as a result, because it's obviously uncomfortable, because that was a genuine occupation at the time. But it meant that the citizens in Israeli villages and towns on the northern borders were safe. And so that's been the strategy again here. Take the territory, clear the territory of Hezbollah as much as possible, secure the civilians on the northern border, putting soldiers' lives at risk, and obviously seeing a tragic number of soldiers dying just in holding that security buffer. In fact, more Israeli soldiers have died holding that security buffer than in the entire American campaign in Iran. But it's understood to be the cost of creating security, and Israelis mourn it, hate it, and accept it. The ultimate challenge that you face is, what do you do at the end of that occupation? Because occupations can't last forever. There are two different choices here. Well, I suppose there's three choices. There are two reasonable choices and one terrible choice. The good choices are you annex the land, you move the border up, you move the border to a more defensible position, and you say from now on, this is going to be clear of enemies because it's ours. To make that effective, you actually have to populate those annexed territories, because otherwise they don't work, and that has obviously geopolitical risks associated with it, and it's not the way that we operate in the 21st century, because mankind has clearly evolved past war. Pardon my sarcasm, it's Hawaiian shirt night. The other option
As
is,
long as you're laughing at your own jokes.
the other option is Lebanon takes over. Now, historically, that hasn't worked because the Lebanese army is substantially weaker than Hezbollah. But Hezbollah is currently the weakest it has been in decades. And with the right support from both the IDF and the United States, it's possible. Hezbollah is cut off from reinforcements, it's cut off from resupply. It is possible to create a situation that allows the Lebanese army to secure the region. The unfortunate truth is Hezbollah is also deeply embedded in Lebanese politics, and that creates a whole other set of risks. So again, it's an imperfect solution. And the third option is everybody goes back to the starting lines and we do all of it again, which is what the world community has generally pushed for in every other conflict on that border.
And so we are both in agreement that we think what Rubio did and what Israel and Lebanon did today with signing is fairly historic. It's absolutely amazing. It's not going to get the credit that it deserves, and I don't know why it doesn't get the credit it deserves. It's a win it's a win all around, and it's a win for President Trump. Rubio. I mean, Rubio is President Trump's Secretary of State, so this is a complete win today, and it should be celebrated as that. And if you'll notice, when you listen to every other podcast or every other analyst, or whether they're being extremely tough on Trump or we try to be fair. And this is a huge win for President Trump, and I wish he would message this. This would be a great time for him to go on Truth Social, but he can't because of J.D. Vance's opposing deal with Iran.
Right,
So
and I think that you're right to touch on that, because that's really the most interesting part of this, that there are two conversations where the sovereignty of Lebanon is on the table. One of the conversations is the conversation Marco Rubio is holding, where he's talking about helping Lebanon through the IDF strength and American support retake sovereignty over Lebanon. And the second one is the MOU discussion, where, because of the language and terminology associated with the first item of the MOU, which includes Lebanon as part of the Iran deal, effectively de facto hands sovereignty of Lebanon to Iran. And so there are these two competing positions, and Israel is not the problem here. Right? This is actually a contest between whether Lebanon has a path to securing its own sovereignty, or Iran is the de facto sovereign of Lebanon. Israel is going to have to deal with whichever outcome comes out of that. From Israel's perspective, it seems as though Israel would prefer to work directly with the Lebanese government, despite skepticism and hesitation about the ability of the Lebanese government to hold its part of the bargain. But it certainly seems to be more willing to try than Iran.
You see, you're raising a very interesting point, and you're seeing this week has been so weird. As we said, it's really hard to figure out. It's hard for everybody to figure out. The reason you're bringing up such a good point is because this deal really is contingent on Israel, obviously, and it's contingent that was signed today, and Lebanon, but it's contingent on wink, wink, Israel. We need as much help as humanly possible, backed up by American support. Now, the Abraham Accords were set up for this exact reason, for all those countries in that region to join together with the wink wink of having Israel defending them and America backing them up at the same time. But Guy, what has happened is J.D. Vance is walking around announcing, "Oh, it's amazing that the United Arab Emirates, for the first time, with Iran, they're gonna. This is like spectacular." And I'm like thinking to myself, "It's not spectacular. You've now taken. You said it to me perfectly. You said it's no longer the Abraham Accords. It's the Ishmael Accords. You have all these nations now that are terrified of Iran, so they're paying them protection money because they don't know if America is going to come and support them militarily if they need it, if needed. Because right now they have been bombed and we did nothing to defend them. So this is like such a fluid, weird type of situation. And I feel bad because President Trump with the Abraham Accords set up something so beautiful. I don't want to see it destroyed. I don't think you want to see it destroyed. But J.D. Vance, Kushner, and Witkoff are destroying it.
Absolutely, and I think that
I like when you
it's
say
important.
that. I like when I give a good assessment and you say absolutely. I'm like really proud of myself.
It was a very good summary.
Thank you.
And I think it's important to note the Abraham Accords really came into play because prior to that, the regional cooperation structure was something called the Arab League. The Arab League is one of the most simultaneously nefarious and useless organizations ever implemented in the region, maybe second only to the UN. The Arab League ostensibly it's effectively been used to drive a pan-Arab agenda, an Islamist agenda. It's consistently used to drive maximalist agendas, but it never actually achieves cooperation because of the internal conflicts within it. And so it usually results in summits that have a few statements, curse the Jews, reiterate support for Palestinian refusalism, and then go back home to fight wars internally. So the Arab League was a failed institution that's been going since before World War II, since around World War II. The Abraham Accords came and said we have to change the paradigm to a regional cooperation. And that regional cooperation has to acknowledge that Israel exists. That was the baseline for joining the Abraham Accords. You have to acknowledge Israel's existence. It was a breakthrough in Middle Eastern politics, and it's led to some incredible things, even with where it is today. The problem that we've been seeing, particularly as the fallout of the Iran war, is that the Abraham Accords were built on two very simple ideas. One, that Israel was a willing participant that could help the Arabs be stronger. Two, that the United States was the security guarantor of the entire deal. The US's behavior in the war, regardless of the strategic logic of why it didn't respond, was not effectively communicated to a lot of different Arab countries, or particularly in the Gulf after Israel hit Qatar, by the way. So Israel has a little bit of blame in this too. Was we're conditionally on your side, maybe. It wasn't a guarantee anymore. It was a maybe guarantee. And what that's done is it's forced the Arabs to work very quickly to look at alternate solutions. Now, none of those alternative solutions are good for us. So days after the Israeli strike on Hamas in Qatar, which again, totally justified, had a really useful effect on the negotiation for the hostages, but there were secondary effects. Days after that, you saw Pakistan and Saudi Arabia signing a military defense agreement. that started a chain of events, which is leading to more and more inter-regional Islamic cooperation agreements, and less national democratic or national, not democratic, internationally coordinated agreements that are based on, I guess, Western hegemony as the insurance.
To the bigger point, this was a win today for President Trump.
Mm-hmm.
This was a win today for everybody. This was a good day. This is a great day. It's a great day for Marco Rubio. I'm happy he stepped in there and took the photo op that he well deserved. And we'll see what happens from here, Guy. And none of us could figure out what goes on from here, but we have to take wins when we can right now, because the second thing I wanted to get into and ask you about is, obviously Iran has broken the ceasefire over and over and over and over again. Now, I understand people are going to say, we don't know what Trump has in mind. That's not an answer, and that's not as people are getting bombed, right? Or as you brought up during the war, when they were unsure of what America was doing, uncertainty is causing a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. So when President Trump announces on Truth Social, Iran just broke the ceasefire, and doesn't follow that up with anything, it's extremely confusing. Now, people are going to say, well, he's confusing you on purpose. It's not me that I'm worried about, Guy. I'm in America right now. I'm not the one at risk of this confusion. It's everybody in that region. I'm not referring to Israel that is confused by that statement.
Well, and I think you need to be specific, because I think confusion isn't the problem. And if confusion is the tactic, confusion is something you do in Western diplomacy. What you have is disappointment, because in Middle Eastern diplomacy, if you have a ceasefire, if you draw a red line and someone crosses that red line, there is an expected response, and failure to deliver that expected response is a sign of weakness. Right? We all remember Barack Obama's red line in Syria in the Syrian civil war. The failure of Barack Obama to enforce that red line is generally considered to be the cause of the Arab Spring. Right? At the end of the day, you're fighting in a region where people expect you to behave in a certain way when a ceasefire is violated. You've said that you're giving the Iranians a chance to come to the table, that you gave them a chance. They targeted a ship, they hit a ship. You can't even palm this off as, oh, well, they kind of didn't miss. They missed, so I'll pretend nothing happened. If you do not respond with extreme force, you look weak. And every time you look weak, the people who are relying on you to be the strong horse, which is the sort of regionally, that's the terminology that you use for who the person you want to back is. You back the strong horse, right? Every time you look weak, the people who were backing you because they thought you were the strong horse start to look around. That pushes people like the Saudis into the hands of Pakistan and the Chinese. That pushes the UAE towards the Russia and China. That pushes Egypt towards Turkey. That pushes Turkey and Riyadh towards building new alliances. Every time you fail to enforce a red line in the Middle East, you lose credibility. And it doesn't even matter if you have this clever strategy of trying to confuse people, because every time you lose credibility, it costs you things that you can't get back.
I'm gonna use an example. I mean, and that we could all relate to at its most basic level, right? Let's say we've never met before, right? And by nature, you're a sarcastic person. Not you, Guy, but you are, but in a good way, in a loving way. And you're being sarcastic to somebody that you've never met. I don't know you're being sarcastic. I don't know you're joking around. I don't know your humor. So I think I'm going to walk away thinking, what an ass I just met. Now,
Story of my life.
Because I don't speak Guy yet, right? So, even though these players have dealt with President Trump, they don't speak President Trump. They don't. And the problem is JD doesn't speak President Trump. Only Rubio. Rubio's the only person, Rubio, Bessent, and a few others are the only ones that could explain Trump. They don't try to speak Trump. So this is when it gets even wonkier for them. They're like, we don't understand what's going on here.
But you know what? The problem goes further than that, because it's not about whether or not people speak Trump. It's what Trump communicates. It's what the same language that Trump speaks communicates in a foreign setting. So one of the things that you have to understand is the reason President Trump was so effective in his first term with the Abraham Accords was he spoke Arabic. He came and said, "Here's what I want. Here's what you're going to get. If you don't like that, then here's a really bad consequence to it." Right? He's often been criticized for hobnobbing with dictators and tyrants, but at the same time, he knows how to speak. He knows how to speak strongman, and that's effective in the Middle East. That helped to drive the Abraham Accords. That helped create that situation where he brokered that deal. Now what he's speaking is back to sort of American political Trump. And in the Arab world, it doesn't matter what you're saying. There's a familiar example that anyone that's been traveling in the world knows, which is that if you speak a local language with a foreign accent, the locals don't treat you as one of them anymore. They try to take advantage of you. Right? Particularly in cultures that have a bizarre, the BAZAAR, the market culture of haggling and sort of a the high tolerance for lying. They know now that President Trump is no longer speaking in the language of the region; he's speaking in the language of the midterms. And whether or not he has a secret plan or a 4D chess move that's going to come around and surprise everybody and go, aha, it doesn't matter, because those people, the longer you drag this out, are reading that as weakness and responding in kind.
You're right. You're raising the point you're bringing up is really the point. It's the midterms, right? So let's say that this is why he's doing it. Let's say 100% this is, or let's say we'll grant him that. The problem is the variables in between have changed, and they're variables you can't count on. They're variables that are extremely dangerous. So what was a situation 4.5 months ago, 5.5 months later, Guy, will be another powder keg that you're going to be forced to deal with 5.5 months later. So I get it. Fine. You're doing it for the midterms if that's the reason. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be status quo. You're not going to just be able to pick up where you left off. So just so people understand that, you can't just pick up where you left off. Yeah, we could go back to bombing, but we're so far past that point of other players making deals not behind their back, in front of us.
Right. And it's also worth noting that this is one of those situations where the target partners we're talking about are very attractive on the world stage right now. Right. The energy infrastructure is really important. Russia and China are dying to get back into the Middle East. President Trump effectively managed to push both of those superpowers out of the Middle East, and every misstep from this administration, every misstep from the American negotiating position, every misstep from Congress, by the way. So when Congress does things like try to vote against the war, which isn't technically a war, it doesn't matter that that's a toothless bill that can't actually do anything, because the president's powers allow him to engage militarily so long as it's not a war. It shows weakness, and that weakness is being preyed upon by America's strategic geopolitical enemies.
Right? So I just want to bring something up. I just want to bring something up because this is just hitting. Is the U.S. says it struck Iran targets after attack on cargo ship. U.S. Central Command says its forces conducted strikes against Iran earlier this evening in response to attack on a commercial ship that was in the Strait.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
You're right.
Because who cares what those targets are? What impact have they really had? We know that Iran doesn't care about being hit.
And it's not just that. Again, it goes back to the performative thing. It's like, this isn't the infrastructure you're hitting. This isn't
Right.
the oil you're hitting. At this point, anything but infrastructure or oil is meaningless.
Which brings us back to, if the US doesn't react with extreme force, it's not reacting at all. And these performative strikes aren't fooling anyone anymore. Nobody buys it. Nobody's playing that game anymore. And again, every time it weakens America's position as the strong horse in the region, every time the people who are trying to replace the United States are moving in, they're getting closer and closer. You will start to see more and more agreements being reached between the Gulf states and Iran, who will start agreeing to pay Iran tolls or agreeing to start paying Iran protection money, because because they now know they don't have the US guarantee. You'll start seeing more agreements between the Gulf states and China. Now, it's also worth remembering the Gulf states own a hell of a lot of assets inside America that they can use, and they have used in the past, to help influence politics or the situation inside America. China getting closer to the Gulf states is a strategic vulnerability for the United States, and failing to respond to these Iranian aggressions is going to have national security implications for the United States.
Okay, so I want to ask you two quick questions, because I don't know how quick your answers are going to be. You are Guy Goldstein. But my first quick question is, so JD Vance is supposedly setting up in Doha CENTCOM and the IRGC that they could communicate. So the IRGC, just so people understand, they're on the list. They're on the terror list. This isn't a good group of people. And just like the mob, once you're in, you're never out. So the people that are negotiating this deal are all former IRGC. Okay, that's just the reality of life. That's who we're dealing with. Just like you were KGB, you'll always be KGB. This is what Putin holds so dear. This is what Putin's goal is Russia. Is that Russia? And this is what Iran's thing is. They want that Iran guy. But what is he thinking in doing this?
Look, he's thinking the same thing. Let me express it a little bit differently before I go down the rabbit hole. There have been people talking about the fact that that JD Vance's advisors on the Middle East are singing from an IRGC songbook. They seem to lack proper information about the Middle East. They seem to lack a proper understanding of who the Middle East are. As a result, he's setting up the sorts of systems that made sense, for example, between the United States and the Soviet Union, because those were two countries that fundamentally had, well, Christian roots that were able to find a way to, and also shared the mutually assured destruction thesis. And so having a red line from the Kremlin to the White House made sense in order to de-escalate there or deconflict. It doesn't work in the Middle East. It's not the language of the Middle East. It doesn't work with organizations who are constantly violating every norm of international law, of civility, of hospitality.
It doesn't work with people that slaughtered 50,000 people in a 2-day span. Just doesn't. Let's call a spade a spade. It just simply doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. It simply doesn't work with. Okay. The second question I wanted to ask you, I think you answered that quite well. So thank you. Okay. So getting back to my second question to you is what is, I don't understand, and anybody with an ounce of intellectual honesty will admit openly they don't understand why President Trump is giving 70 jets to Turkey, 5 jets to Turkey. Listen, we've been proponents of getting out of the United Nations. We've been proponents of getting out of NATO, specifically because of countries like Turkey and Erdogan, who is the Muslim Brotherhood, who absolutely And again, President Trump bringing up the fact that he convinced Erdogan not to attack, not to join forces with Iran, and thanking him and their best buds. He was thanking him for not attacking him, for not attacking America, because I didn't get really what Trump was trying to say, because in a sense he was saying, thank you for not, he was implying, well, they didn't attack Israel, but we were allies in the war that America started. This thing is insane. Do you get this for one moment? Do you get this?
Absolutely not. I think that the fact that we're even talking about letting the Turks back into the F-35 program, or even talking about delivering to them the F-35, you have to understand the F-35 is the secret weapon that makes America and her allies the most powerful army in the world right now. That's one of the things that Israel and the United States proved over the skies of Iran over the past year. The F-35 is an unstoppable force projection machine, and probably one of the most powerful, and certainly one of the most powerful military devices ever created, and it is a secret weapon. We are very protective of who has access to that technology, because like all military technology, once your enemy gets their hands on it, they can backwards engineer it, and they can figure out its weaknesses. They can figure out how to take advantages of its strength, and they can figure out countermeasures to it. The fact that we treat Turkey as anything but hostile should be criminal. In fact, I believe it was Marco Rubio that pointed out that that there are laws preventing us from providing advanced American military technology to Turkey due to their enrollment in the Russian S-400 program. So, for starters, it seems as though this move is actually against the law in the United States, so it can't be done. But on top of that, just the idea, just talking about it that way, is very disconcerting. It's very disconcerting, again, for America's allies, for America's position in the world, and for understanding who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And like you said, I don't care if Turkey is in NATO. Erdogan has led that country down a path where it is now an authoritarian dictatorship that is aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. It has a massive infrastructure creating weapons that are being used, that are going to be used against the US and her allies at some point. And you know that that's true because there's no one for Turkey to use them against that is not an ally of the United States.
Perfectly said, and I thank you for answering those two quick questions with two amazing answers. But I think this is what people are really confused by. I think they're also confused by, because I think MAGA, for the most part, never lost support. I mean, Trump never lost support among MAGA for his actions in Iran. And I think as people bring up the midterms, which is very confusing, is independents outweigh Republicans and Democrats. That's just the reality at this point. So even if sample polling is trending upwards for Republicans, and it is right now, and it's not that, and it's not due to Republicans doing anything special, it's due to the fact that another thing we want to discuss is Mamdani in New York. And this should terrify this should terrify everybody. This has nothing to do with Israel. This is America they're in, but yet it's being blamed on Israel. It's being blamed on Bibi. You had Joe Scarborough blaming this on Bibi, and this goes back to the thing. It's like if Jews don't defend themselves, why don't you defend themselves? If they do defend themselves, you're defending yourselves too much. It's absolutely ridiculous what's going on, and it's frightening what's going on in New York.
Look, absolutely, and I think that looking at the recent New York election and the fact that Mamdani's radical socialist slate just ran through the primaries there is incredibly disconcerting. I think a lot of people were hoping that Mamdani was going to be a flash in the pan, that he would win the election based on popularity and vibes or whatever it is that he ran on. Try to run the city for a little while and fail. Everyone would see him for the failure he is, and then everyone would move on and say socialism was silly. This is really showing that that's not what's happening in New York. What we're seeing is that the radical positions are making a lot of progress. They're taking ground in in seats that are incredibly secure blue seats, which means that once they win the primary, it's going to be very hard to knock them off that perch. And these people are going to start entering the mainstream American discourse. Right? AOC did not turn out to be a flash in the pan, despite all of her failures to understand reality. Ilhan Omar is still there, despite all of the crimes that she's been accused of, and the various investigations that have
And
taken
Rashida
place.
Tlaib with her
Yeah.
insane commentary, they're all there.
Right. And the more of these people start taking up air in the conversation, the worse the conversation gets for America. The other thing is, it's setting precedents. It's showing people that this tactic is going to work. We've been watching it take place since the Occupy movement. This idea of primarying people out in heavily blue seats in order to put radical candidates in place, but not at this scale and not in a city as important as New York.
I thought you were going to say I thought you were going to bring up the eat the rich, which is really right. Mamdani announced today that he was, that they passed the freezing of the rent the rent stabilization of rent stabilization. So for people that live in rent stabilized apartment, you can't increase how much they have to pay, which is I get it. Listen, in California, this is Newsom's worst nightmare right now. Is that a bill that is going to make more corporations leave because they want to tax more businesses here, tax corporations, cap the pay of CEOs, just totally everything anti-capitalism and totally anti-America. So this is spreading all over, to your point.
Right. And again, it's worth taking into account that Mamdani balanced the books by getting a $9 billion bailout from the state of New York.
Yes.
We've run out of your money to take, so we're going to take other people's money as well. Is not actually a healthy system, and yet it's progressing. Yet it's taking more ground because the vibes are more important than the future. And the candidates that have been put in there, the candidates that made it in on this Mamdani slate, should terrify the entire country. Not because they're necessarily going to be the next AOC, not even because they're necessarily going to be big shots, but because they show that once you get that Islamo-communist foot in the door, it's not a snowball anymore. It's an explosion. It's not a slow process. It can happen. It happens just like that, and reversing it is going to be really hard.
And again, it goes to blame the Jews. I mean, at the end of the
It is the
day,
Jews' fault.
it's the Jews' fault. It's 0.02% of the world's population's fault that all of this stuff is going on. I mean, it's one of the most. It's scary. I don't know if you saw. A lot of people have seen that AI video of the guy wearing the star, and you're crashing through the cement to every different era of when Jew hatred was going on. And I said this to my friend the other night. I said, just record this conversation for people in 100 years. They'll be having the same exact conversation that we're having now. And one of the things I think we loved about Trump the most was that he was a pioneer. I mean, he was like, I don't want this conversation to be happening in 100 years. I think we could stop this from happening in 100 years. And he was on that trajectory. He was on that path. And I don't think most people want communism. I don't. I just think their messaging is brilliant. And they know how to feed off people's biggest fears, and they know the exact words to use to scare people into voting for them. They know the tropes. They know everything. This isn't organic, okay, Guy, right? There's nothing organic about what's going on.
Absolutely not. And you can see the coordination of the movements by people like Neville Roy Singham, by people like George Soros in the past, the Rockefeller Foundation, Tides Foundation. There are all of these different groups that keep coming up across different political ideas that are all aligned with this sort of omni movement, if you will. There's an increasing number of people publishing information, actually unmasking parts of this movement. The really tragic thing is no one's caring, because everybody's so caught up in the hype of the actual emotional, the energy that it produces, both the people who are for the movement and the people against the movement, by the way, that everybody's ignoring the reality and seeing what's around, seeing how to actually pull it apart. The other problem is that this movement is preying on the vulnerabilities of our democratic system and our liberal democracies. It is taking advantage of things like free speech. It is the same way as people have been taking away of birthright citizenship. It takes advantage of the US laws for protecting US citizens abroad. It takes advantage of the structure of how the Democratic primaries can move a candidate in with 3,000 to 5,000 votes, who will then automatically get a seat that's an entire district in New York. Right? All of these ways that it looks at the system that, the most individualist and the most free system of government ever created, the United States of America, and it understands where those freedoms create vulnerabilities, and it preys on exactly that. Right. And it's worth noting that, because that's saying it preys on exactly the things that make America great and that make the American experiment the miracle that it is.
Listen, perfectly said. What else are we missing? What else did you have we missed anything? I don't want to jump on any stories that we want to jump on because we're still confused by them. So
look, I think the only real story we haven't talked about is a goodbye and good riddance to Keir Starmer, one of the most useless politicians in recent political history, despite the fact that there was a stiff competition for it. Good luck to the UK, because they've used, again, similarly nefarious tactics that undermine the nature of democracy to take a former mayor, Andy Burnham, and get him into a position where they're now going to be able to sort of shoehorn him into the leadership of the Labour Party, and he will be every bit as bad as Keir Starmer, if not worse. So the situation in the UK will not have improved, because there are people that have learnt how democracies are vulnerable and keep taking advantage of them, and now we have it across the pond.
listen, I agree with you 100%. And one of my favorite things, though, that he mentioned when he was leaving office is like that he was proud that anti-Semitism was less in his party than when he first took over. And I was like, did I miss the memo on something, Mr. Starmer? Because it seems pretty bad.
Yes, but it's now in the Green Party and the Islamist Party. So they've now created two parties to the left of Labour, where they're rapidly growing because they're encouraging all the anti-Semites to join them. So yes, anti-Semitism in the Labour Party may have gone down from the peak of Jeremy Corbyn, but anti-Semitism in the UK under his watch has spiked substantially, to the point that UK Jews are questioning whether or not they have a home in the United Kingdom anymore.
Well said. And I think we've said enough. I want to thank Guy. You look fabulous in your Tommy Bahama shirt. I want to thank everybody that helps make this possible. I want to thank Turbo and Dave, and Golan will be back next week. We have some amazing guests lined up. I want to thank everybody from the bottom of our hearts. You can find us everywhere at eldersofzionism.com. Guy has got a fantastic new article up on Substack. What's the name of it, Guy?
Zionism grew a backbone.
Zionism grew a backbone, and you can find it at it's a Guy thing on Substack. You could also find it. He links it with Elders of Zionism. So I encourage everybody to read it. I mean, my God, the amount of people that restack your stuff is quite fascinating, because you're so good. That's how good Guy Goldstein is. And I encourage everybody to read it and follow us everywhere. Subscribe, give us that like. And I want to thank everybody. And on that note, I want to wish everybody a good morning, afternoon, and night world, wherever you are. God bless you all.